I think the problem that we've had is that we've had a president who has not leveled with us, and it has created a whole set of mistrust. I believe in the government. I actually think that government is something you need, and then therefore there has to be a really established relationship of trust between those who have been elected and those who have done the electing. But you can't have it if you don't level and tell exactly what the problem is and assume that we're all smart enough to get our act together to be helpful on it. So.
Madam Secretary, thank you for being here today. Some might find it ironic that our current president, the son of a career diplomat, would come up with something called the Bush Doctrine, which we just learned about, or heard of for the first time apparently last week.
Some of us.
What would you advise, at the risk of promoting your book even further, what would you advise our next president to do with the Bush Doctrine? Should it be dead on arrival?
Well, the Bush Doctrine, the whole issue of preemption and prevention is a very difficult and complicated one, because under the United Nations Charter, every country has a right to defend itself, and able to take action where you can to prevent a country hurting you. But by making it a doctrine, it did several things. One is have this kind of a discussion, but also made it possible for other countries less good and wonderful than we are decide that X country is trying to attack them and give them kind of this idea that they could do that with impunity. And so it's created a whole host of problems to do with that, and in other words, kind of articulating something that was understood and then making it a more complicated issue. So the question is how you say we're not going to do that anymore without undermining your capability of defending yourself. The real problem with the whole issue of preemption is the Achilles heel of intelligence. So, the kind you gather. So, for instance, and I do this with my classroom, is I say, if you should pull a gun out on me, and I had a gun and I could shoot you, that would be self-defense. I would be allowed to do that. Somebody came in with a gun and tried to shoot me, I could take out a gun and shoot them, self-defense. But if somebody came to me, said there's somebody downstairs with this rather odd-looking suitcase, and he's got an Uzi in it, and he's coming up here, we're going to shoot him, and you shoot him, and it turns out to be a saxophone, you have committed murder. And so the intelligence of knowing what's in that box or what that country is about is absolutely crucial to the whole, quote, doctrine. And we know that we have imperfect intelligence. So that is part of the problem. The reason I have to say that the vice presidential candidate got confused on this is that the Bush Doctrine has been, it actually has many elements to it, most of which also should be discarded in terms of us and them and various aspects of it. But the preemption prevention thing is very complicated. We should move away from it, but we have to be really careful not to undermine the very basic concept of the right to self-defense. So that is, you know, to be fair about it, that's the problem with it. But the way it was phrased and to become so central to the way that the U.S. thinks it should be operating in national security is a real problem, and we have to move away from that, and we have to move away from the fact that we have divided the world in the way it has been.
Madam Secretary, I was wondering if you could address the UN. I know that national sovereignty and the UN have always been kind of at odds with each other. Can you tell us a little bit how you think that will play out in the coming years?
Yeah. Well, the UN, I think, I am a great supporter of the UN, and I often kid about the fact that I think the reason President Clinton named me to the job was that I had actually won the UN contest in Colorado for the Rocky Mountain Empire when I was a sophomore in high school, mainly because I could name, at that stage, the 51 countries that were members in alphabetical order. Now, there being now 191 or 192, I couldn't do that. But the issue of sovereignty is very much, has been the basis of it, is that the UN has been an organization that is based on the concept of nation states, and that nation states each should have a vote and everybody is equal, except in the Security Council, where the 5 permanent members have a veto. But what is happening is that as there are these transnational problems, the issue of sovereignty has become a question, and it comes a question in a very specific way. And that is that one could argue, I wouldn't, but one could argue that during World War II, we really did not know what the Germans were doing. And therefore, without information, we couldn't act. Now we have information about everything, and we know what is going on in other countries. And the responsibility of the head of state of a country, or the head of government, is to protect his or her people, the territory, and the way of life. And if the person is not doing that, then he is not fulfilling the responsibility of being the head of that country. So a doctrine that has come up recently is called the responsibility to protect. And that is that the international community, i.e. the UN, if you know that somebody is committing genocide or ethnic cleansing in a country, that as the international community you have a right to do something because that leader is not actually protecting his population. Now that runs smack into the issue of sovereignty. And that is what's happening in Sudan, for instance, or happened in Burma, even with a natural disaster, is that you can say, no, you can't come into my country because I'm sovereign. The truth is the U.S. is a lot a protector of our own sovereignty. We are very jealous of it. But I think that we have to decide that under certain circumstances, we are actually safer if, in fact, we give up a tiny bit of sovereignty in order to get help on a particular issue internationally. But you've come up against the big issue that happens. The other problem is that the UN is regularly criticized for things that are not its fault. It is not an operation that is not run by the nation states. It's the sum of its parts. And while the Secretariat and the Secretary General are criticized all the time, the bottom line is it is the nation states who continue to make the decision. Among the things that the next president, I think, has to do is to recognize the importance of the UN and push it to reform. It needs a lot of reform. It was created, as I said, after World War II. It has an oversized bureaucracy, and it doesn't do things very efficiently. And the U.S. has not been particularly supportive, and we have created artificial financial crises by not paying our peacekeeping bills or taking too long to pay our dues, leading our best friends, the British, in a General Assembly session to deliver a line they had waited more than 200 years to say, which is representation without taxation. And if we don't support it, then it's hard to push for reform. The thing that worries me, though, is that people don't understand well enough how important the UN is to us, and in this country are afraid of the UN. There are those who really do think that the UN has Black Hawk helicopters that swoop down in the middle of the night and steal your lawn furniture. And then there are people who don't like the UN because it's full of foreigners, which frankly can't be helped. Are we done?
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to the Honorable Madeleine Albright, former United States Secretary of State. Thank you, Secretary Albright. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.